I'm Elise Tan, and I'm your host for this episode of Hard Truth by Vertex podcast. Today, I'm really excited to have Carmen Yuen, General Partner at Vertex Ventures Southeast Asia and India. Hi, Carmen. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks, Elise, for having me join.
Yeah, so I think Carmen Yuen is no stranger to many of us in the Southeast Asia startup ecosystem. In Vertex, she has spent nearly 10 years investing and also helping the companies to become regional and global champions. Prior to Vertex, Carmen has served many years in government-backed initiatives such as EDB Investments as well as Seeds Capital, where she helped to invest and support many companies. So, Carmen, what's up these days?
Well, we just closed our fundraise, right, for Fund 5. And so we just made that announcement of $541 million US. So I guess now is the beginning of yet another chapter after we are done fundraising. It's about looking for opportunities to invest in companies, to grow them, and the cycle starts again.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is interesting times for us. I also want to know something. How did you know about Vertex in the first place?
Oh my goodness, this is going back history, right? So it has to go way back. And in 2000, I joined EDB Investments. And so when I was in EDB Investments, there was a day when I was on a call with this particular lady called Sin Hui. So Sin Hui is with Vertex, and she was with Vertex at that time. So we had a conversation on perhaps things like the fair value of the fund that EDB was backing Vertex in, and probably on some fund administration matters. I can't even remember. But we went about our separate ways. So it was more like, okay, I was aware of Vertex investments at that time, but nothing very much. Then in 2007, I was with Seeds Capital, which is now being managed under Enterprise Singapore. And because we have got Seeds, which is a co-investment fund, so therefore there's enough things to keep the team busy. So for us, we wanted to find out the relevance of some of the programs. So we started talking to ecosystem players. And one of that people that we spoke to was actually Keylog, right? So again, after the interview, we went about our lives. Nothing much happened. In 2012, I took a sabbatical for family reasons. And about late 2013, I decided to emerge back into the marketplace. And lo and behold, I received an email from our managing partner, Joo Hock. And Joo Hock was asking whether I was free for coffee. And of course, I was free for coffee. I was not working, right? So of course, I was free. And during our coffee chat, he asked if I would be keen to join Vertex because we were going to launch a Singapore-focused fund. So those are all my encounters with Vertex since way back in 2000. Who's to know that 14 years later, I'll be part of the team. And lo and behold, I'm still here 10 years counting.
Wow. And I also want to say that, sometimes things are so coincidental because you mentioned about meeting Keylog in 2007. I think that might have been a time where he first joined Vertex as well. So I think the timing is really, perfect. So you met most of the stakeholders in the firm. Yeah. So in Singapore, definitely you have seen a lot of the ecosystem growth. Would you be able to kind of walk us through what you have seen, how the ecosystem has kind of flourished?
In 2000, there was a fund called Technopreneur Investment Fund, which was managed by EDB. And that's a fund of fund program. So our chairman, Mr. Teo Min Kian, was also overseeing that program. So that fund's aim was really to seed and become an LP or an investor into many of the global general partners. And the intent is for them to set up a team of operation folks here in Singapore, not only to train up the ecosystem VC folks, but also to invest into the companies in this region. And of course, tax incentive was loaded in. But towards the tail end of the program, they were unable to raise another lot of money from Singapore. And so therefore, many of these folks relocated to wherever money source is. So what is my takeaway? My takeaway is that it's therefore very important to grow local GPs, right? So that they are staying here, good times, bad times, as opposed to those who are coming through when things look really good, but when the fire is burning here, they relocate somewhere else. So that's learning point number one. Now, Singapore is very small, and our government can be very focused on what they need to achieve. And when they are very focused, they can actually marshal a lot of stat boards to do things together just to drive that outcome. So over that span of time, I've seen how MTI, together with all the step boards underneath, the JTC, the EDB, and so on, come together and created what is now known as our Silicon High Rise, right? Which is in Buena Vista, right? One North. So that is where you see not just only the startups, dedicated cheaper rent for startups, but you also see some VCs, you see service providers, some of the lawyers are also moving around there. It's strategic because it's also very near to the university. So hopefully, when founders decide to spin out from the universities, they will locate there. So it's all about having enough like-minded people hanging around together, exchange ideas, and who knows, the next startup will be there, right?
Yeah. For me, obviously I don't have as much experience as you. I joined the ecosystem more than 10 years back. So at the time, what I remember most is really the Block 71 setup. I just want to ask you, do you think there is a type to the kind of successful companies for Singapore?
So I will say we imagine that there should be, but actually startups can come from anywhere. Right. In Singapore, we have got some of the favorite companies that we always quote, right? So if you look at Neom, it's in the fintech space, it's in the payment space. People will say that, oh, this is super thin margin, but yet it is a billion-dollar company. Then you have got PestNap, who will imagine that Southeast Asia will have software as a service opportunity, and furthermore in the intellectual property space, right? And yet they are also a unicorn. Their clients are 12,000 global names. And more recently, we invested into a company called PropSeller, founded by a guy who's not from our region, from Europe, right? But the whole idea is how can you optimize the entire journey of buying and selling your homes. And they have perfected that solution, so much so that I would like to think that going forward, there'll be a lot more media interviews with them to tap his thoughts and his insights into what can be a better experience for folks like you and me when we want to buy and sell houses. Now, this is just from our portfolio companies. But if you look at companies that does resonate with many of us, Razer, consumer electronics goods, it has a cult following. And it's interesting to watch how it could actually achieve the kind of euphoria, just like Apple whenever they launch the next Apple, iPhone, whatever. The kind of cloud following is amazing. Then now we are talking about a lot of direct to consumers. But in more than 10, 15 years ago, there was actually another company called Skin Inc., started by Sabrina, right? And she was a HP girl, but she also started Skin Inc. with the intention of like having direct-to-consumer personalized skincare. Now, she is also gunning for an IPO on the NASDAQ or somewhere in US. So for me, there are enough interesting spread of companies that Singapore is capable of developing.
Yeah, you're right. So Carmen, thanks for sharing what kind of companies might succeed in Singapore. What do you think for Vertex would be our investment strategy in Singapore?
So for Vertex in Fund 5, we have told our investors that there will be 6 areas we look at. Consumer economy, software enterprise, you have got fintech, digital healthcare, agri-tech and sustainability, as well as mobility, right? And we already told our investors that we will invest in Series A. So then what it means is for us to look at all these opportunities and carve out what could make sense. Now, things that requires physical infrastructure, example, farms, physical land for farms, unlikely we will be involved, right? Things that requires Vertex to consider opportunities, example, in building charging stations, unlikely we will be involved. But things that are more digital enablement, if it is about looking at how battery charging has been distributed, where are the available slots, things like that, perhaps you can be involved.
Do you have any hard truths to share when it comes to raising funds or even building a successful business for the region?
Success lies in the eyes of the beholder, right? So if a person is successful without raising VC money, well and good. And there are many founders who are able to grow their businesses without external financing help, other than maybe raising some debt. So debt is successful in and of itself. But for tech companies, generally, they will need to raise money to prove out certain points. So the hard truth to me will be that they need to understand the need to rely on local talent. So just like when we pitch to our investors, we'll tell our investors that, look, we have got local teams on the ground. We have got people who are based in Indonesia, Thais who are based in Thailand. We have got Indian nationals who are based in India and so on. Same when our tech companies are looking to expand overseas, they ought to consider hiring local talent to helm the local practices. And what better than to work with ASEAN scholars? So when you have got ASEAN scholars who have graduated, who have gone back to their home countries, these are the people who already know what Singaporeans are like. These are the people who can become our bridge for setting up presence in wherever overseas countries that we want to expand into. They should be trustworthy enough for us to actually seek their counsel, seek their input when it comes to maybe the local laws for hiring, or where should we plant our next office, how do we approach the next client that we want to approach? Is there a mechanism to doing our pricing strategy, things like that?
Carmen, you have obviously seen, quite a few cycles in the ecosystem. So right now, how would you describe the part of the cycle that we are in?
We are just in a very long, sort of like ground zero, ground level one type of trajectory, which is good. So when we look at 2021 and 2022, the fear was that enough investors were giving a lot of checks away to startups on valuation multiples that I don't even understand. I've seen this happen in 2000, right? But again, it happened in 2021 of sorts. I suppose it's because we were just coming out of COVID and everybody was getting very excited about the opportunities, and investors had pent up funds waiting to be deployed. But the music kind of like stopped in 2022. So now companies have raised a lot of capital and who are smart enough to pull the handbrakes, they are lucky, they are good, so they should really make their money stretch. Now, for those companies that have not raised enough money, then it's on them to quickly move into the EBITDA positive zone and hopefully to be cash flow neutral. And that will give them another day for sustaining themselves. We had our internal discussion yesterday, and we talked about one of our portfolio companies that finally obtained a term sheet. And I remember asking the team, how long did it take for the company when they started asking or fundraising till to that day when they had received a term sheet? Now, term sheet doesn't mean documentation is done, money is in. There's still a couple more months. So from the time they started positioning the company for fundraising until when they had the term sheet, it took them a good 8 months. We previously would have completed the deal in 8 months. So basically what it means now is that it's a prolonged period to fundraise. So the team needs to look at where they can streamline. Either that or they just have to get more revenue. I mean, there's only that number of levers that you can push or pull and sit out. In the event that they cannot raise money, then the hard truth will be that maybe they should consider either liquidating the company. Investors will hate that, but sometimes that's the best thing to do. Or they have to quickly find a combination opportunity, which is to do a merger, so that there is so that whatever that has been developed over the years is not written down to ground zero.
Yeah, I think that's the hard truth these days. But I also wonder, do you think that, looking back, do you think that this kind of timing is the best time to start companies?
It's a nervous time, right? It's a nervous time, but unless you've got very strong... So there can be great companies that can be founded, but you need to overlay with a possible new trend that people are looking for, where you must show good traction. And investors are not extremely creative. So investors sometimes want to look at data. So unless that trend maps alongside with your data, your traction, your repeatability, the value of the quality of your repeat usage, whatever those metrics you may be measuring, then if not, it's still going to be very hard to raise money.
Yeah. That's true. And circling back to what you mentioned, if they are not like revenue positive, then it's time now to really cut costs in some way. But what we know is that when costs are cut, oftentimes revenue will fall. right? And then it could be really a downward spiral.
Yes.
Then how can a company navigate that and eventually still be, attractive to investors?
So the question is, should they even go for investors? Right? That's the bigger question that the founder and the board members have to deliberate on. But sometimes the best thing to do is to pull back and focus on your core. What is your core business, right? And this is not just limited to only startups. So even large companies, after they acquire a couple of companies, after they've grown into too big to fail, we imagine them to be, they may have a lot of fats around the company that needs to be trimmed. If not, those could be the areas where it can distract the company. So case in point, right? So Grab had recently announced that they are shutting the whole wealth tech part of their business. And to Grab, this could be a very good reason, a very legitimate reason, because it could be distracting and it could be yielding very, very little revenue and massive customer acquisition costs to get people to try, but you don't see any value in the revenue.
Can you remember like examples where people can actually learn from the experience?
So one of the things was, so PestSnap is founded by graduates, right? So these are the graduates who didn't really work in corporate settings before, and they were fresh out of the university. They had a pain point that they want to address, which is totally legitimate. But as they grow their company, researchers, techies are all very young. So at that time, the mindset of the founder was, great, my company is very young, and I'm very proud that the median age is, 27 or something. So finally, when we told him, I think you may need some people who are more senior in the company to guide the company through, it wasn't totally well received, right? Because he's like, no, the company is very young. And when he hired a senior person who's probably about 50, it took him a while to consider having an older person, because he does come with certain lenses that older people are harder to change, right? So they may be so fixated on their ways, they don't understand technology. So it took him quite a while to overcome this hurdle. But I must say that now, when we move fast forward a couple of years, he has matured, and I think he sees the value in having people who are more experienced, who are older than him, to lead the company through. Having said that, on the flip side, his other experience was, so when this was checked off, right, that, okay, I can hire older people who are more experienced. The next thing was, okay, why don't I hire people who are from the large tech companies? Oh, that was also a nightmare, because some of these people are so used to life in a large corporation. They are not used to rolling up their sleeves and doing the stuff, right? So that's why we also had quite a few wrong hires. People who came with very good credentials, but who were just quite a misfit for the company.
Yeah, so I think it is really not easy to be an entrepreneur. So hats off to all of them. So I also want to ask you a bit about the exit opportunities for Singapore companies. So obviously we have seen Grab grown and exited, but what do you think are more realistic exit opportunities?
So in 2021, Cento, another one of the VC funds based in Singapore, they did a research, right, just to map out what are the kind of exits that Southeast Asia companies have recorded. So of course you have got IPO being one, M&A being the other, and secondary sales being the third. So actually, IPO is one of the smaller chunks. The bulk of the exit is actually from secondary sales, and this is what we experience as well, right? I mean, so we talk about Grab, that it has IPO'd, but truth be told, Vertex actually exited before the company went public. So we did not have to be locked up. We did not have to see any fluctuation in the share price. After the lockup, usually there will be certain directions that share prices can go. But the product or the company has to be so good to start with before you can even have secondary opportunities. So it's really down to how we are able to invest into great companies where the company shares are constantly being in demand. And when they are in demand, then there will be opportunities for people to call us, knock on our doors, talk to the founders to say, hey, can I buy some of your shares? Then and only then will we have the opportunity to have that conversation going on secondary. So for us, I will say that we have seen cases where our exits are done by secondaries, but on other terms, we have also seen M&A. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really true. And speaking about secondaries, M&A opportunities, I'm sure that's something that Vertex as an investor play a strong role in and have a lot of access to people who could possibly do that. So I just want to ask you as well, how are we as an investor? What do we do for our portfolio companies? What is the kind of relationship that we have?
Yeah, I will say that we have a very tight, neat relationship with our founders. Of course, over the years, we will have new founders coming on stream. So the founders who have been with us for a longer time, they will have lesser time with us, but it's still quality. So, for example, whenever Jeffrey comes back to Singapore, he will oftentimes make a trip to come to Vertex and have a coffee with maybe Kellogg in Joo Hock. So the quality of that friendship continues even though our journey has gone further and we have to spend more time taking care of the babies in our portfolio. But when it comes to working with founders, it doesn't matter whether it's holiday. So yeah, we don't really respect public holidays. We work anyway. So our founders also work anyway, right? So we are just merely a text away. We do go on phone calls. We do challenge our founders on certain principles that they may have or certain philosophies they may have, just so that they are more sharp on why they choose to take a certain route. Yeah, so that's how I would say our relationship is. Yeah.
Perhaps a testimony to that is when we have an interview with Roshni, founder of Parent Inc. So she mentioned that, when Carmen speaks to her, the first thing she say isn't like, oh, how is the business doing? But what you ask her is, how is she doing as a person? So I think that really set us apart. Yeah. So Carmen, you mentioned that when you first joined, the team is really small and obviously you are the first female in the team. So I'm really glad that it has changed over the years. Now I think our ratio is nearly 40% who are female, who are investing. So I also want to then ask you, what do you think are some of the advice or tips that you would give either for female investors or female founders, aspiring or existing?
So just to make a small correction, I wasn't the first female employee. I was the first female partner. So as a result, I would say that Vertex has always been hiring women. So it wasn't because it's a nice and fanciful, then they started hiring. So they always have a women on the team. Now, as to what can female founders and female investors expect going forward, the playing field is still uneven. So even for female GPs who are trying to raise funds, they take way longer time, maybe double the time just to raise a female focused fund. And that is currently the fact. But I believe things are changing, given that now more corporations, more investors are aware of this whole inclusion topic. So some of them are more ready to write checks to support female-backed funds. At the same time, for female entrepreneurs, it's a matter of time that we should see more of them. As to how women entrepreneurs can be backed, this unfortunately, statistics also show that only 2% of the female founders are able to raise funds. So I believe it's also a matter of time. Now, fundraising is just one aspect of growing a successful business. The other aspect is having that group that is really close-knit, the accountability group, where you can actually cry on somebody else's shoulders and get that support. I think that is very important. So for women founders, just because you're a woman doesn't mean that your journey will be harder, right? To me, all founders are hard. It's just that we choose to look at it through the lens of being a woman. I believe that as women founders, we have our strength. We probably look at things slightly differently to that of a man. And it's great because now you have got more women GPs, you've got more women partners. So therefore, the ability to engage women partners, women investors is there. So it will be a matter of time. If your proposition is strong enough, you should be able to raise funds.
Yeah, and I'm excited to share that, as part of our fifth fund, we do have a co-investment envelope of 50 million to support female-founded or co-founded companies. So how this works is that the main fund will invest a certain amount, and then the female fund will co-invest alongside. Yeah. So I also want to say that when I first got to know you better, I realized you have 4 children. So how do you juggle that, family life with the hectic work of venture capital?
So I will say that thankfully when I joined Vertex, my kids were older. So they were less dependent where I didn't need to change diapers. So they're beyond that. The value that I feel I bring as a result whenever I meet with them at home over dinner. So I used to try to make it a point to be home for dinner. Then that's when we sit around the dinner table, no phones, and we will just talk through how's your day, what did you do at school, and we get to know their friends, their children. It also helps that I do have a very steady domestic helper at home who has been with us for the last 20 over years. So because she's been with us for so long, therefore it's easier for me to just entrust everything in the house to her. If things are not so clean, there's always alternatives like wearing slippers, or if you cannot stand it, take it down, wash it yourself, right? Whatever. So I think there are ways to go around it. But I also have a husband who knows my hours. So he's like, no pressure, just that he doesn't pick me up from work, which helps so that I don't feel the pressure of like, I need to shut down. Yeah. So I think it's all down to family. Yeah.
Yeah. And I really subscribe to what you mentioned about looking at where you truly add value. I feel like, you also run your family like a business. So, yeah. So being able to focus where your value is and then bringing other people who could do the work as well as yourself, right? And trusting them and empowering them. Yeah. So, Carmen, thank you so much for your time. It's always an enjoyable and interesting conversation with you. Yeah. So thank you so much.